Welcome to another edition of the Giants Huddle podcast. It is our NFC East Reporter Roundtable. I am John Schmeelk. We have a lot of friends of the program here, and a couple new faces as well. We welcome in Bobby Belt. He covers the Cowboys for 105.3 FM. He works for friend of the program, Brian Broaddus. They are comrades in arms down there. We have Fran Duffy, who is with PHLY covering the Eagles and All City Network on the draft. And Ryan Fowler, he was on our programming at the NFL Combine this year with Bleacher Report, Draft Network, and he's the host of the Commanding the Huddle podcast. Gentlemen, we are, when this airs, about 9 days away from the start of the regular season. And I know we're all surprised the Cowboys steal the headlines about a week and a half before the year. So, Bobby, CeeDee Lamb, a contract I think all of us assumed would get done and look like this. For some reason, it took this long. Maybe you can explain why. And then we're still kind of waiting on Dak Prescott. So, your take on some of the business the Cowboys have gotten done and what still is to come in maybe the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, the Lamb deal is a little puzzling in the sense of just how ordinary it is. And how much it seemed to check every box along the way of what everybody expected. You get to the end of it and you go, okay, well then what were you slow playing? Well, what was the big sticking point? Because everything in there looks like a really easy number that you could have come to. 34 seems like it makes sense. 4 years seems like it makes sense. The guarantees seem like they make sense. So it feels a lot like Dallas was just driving a hard bargain, trying to just drive something home. And eventually they had to come up to CeeDee's numbers. CeeDee had been at 34 for a while, him and his agent, Tory Dandy. And it was something where the Cowboys were kind of dug in at 32, being closer to the A.J. Brown number. And Tory Dandy, of course, negotiating the A.J. Brown number. He's going to want to keep getting his clients at the position up and up and up. And so I still don't know what the holdup was there. Nobody's really sure other than just it feels like a little bit of stubbornness, and a little bit of a prioritization of winning the negotiation, like really wanting that rather than just saving time and getting him here at the start of training camp and knocking those things out. But I think everybody's happy it's done. CeeDee Lamb was up at the facility on Tuesday and was really happy, ear to ear smile.
I would hope
Um,
so.
yeah. I mean, with all that money now, and so, but he was. It's something where I think that everybody's kind of relieved around the building, breathing a sigh of relief, and now it turns over to can they get Dak done before the year starts? Because if it doesn't get done before the year starts, I don't know that it gets done until the offseason. And if you let it get to the new league year, I don't know that Dak Prescott's back.
Yeah, and I think just a real quick follow up. How much this is maybe Dak not wanting to get it done now and actually wanting to be able to test the market next year?
I don't think he wants to test the market necessarily in terms of as a leverage play. If he gets to the open market, the Cowboys can't match it. He's out. And he would just I don't know that he'd give them a shot to be honest. I think he feels kind of like you guys have known this was coming, get it done. The problem is just he has way too much leverage. There's no reason for him to like give on anything in these negotiations. There's nothing other than just I want to be a Cowboy. That would be it. And if the shine on being a Cowboy has kind of worn off for him a little bit, or he's got that fatigue setting in, then he doesn't feel necessarily any need to give them over things. And so I think the Cowboys are at a point with Dak where they are probably sitting in these negotiations saying, okay, Dak, you win. You're going to get whatever you want. But here's what your roster is going to look like. If you want this much money, you're probably going to lose this guy. If you take this, then you may only lose this guy. And I think they're going to kind of lay out for him. This is what the roster looks like based on these tiers. You tell us which one you want to be paid at, and we'll tell you the team you get around you.
All right, Fran, I think the big offseason story for the Eagles are the changes in the coaching staff. Two brand new coordinators. Obviously, there were some questions around Nick Sirianni at the end of last season as well with how that season ended, which I'll call it a collapse because I don't know what else you could call it with the way they
Yeah.
played the final month and a half. How have those things kind of come together here? And do you think whatever caused those issues at the end of last year to make the Eagles fall off that cliff, do you think they've been solved?
Yeah, I mean, right now everything looks great. Obviously, no games have been played yet, and so you don't know how things are going to go until adversity strikes. I think when you look at the offense, the big thing is from an efficiency standpoint, this was still an offense, despite how bad it was in the second half of last year. They still finished as a top 10 offense in the league, John. So I think when you make the change from Brian Johnson to Kellen Moore, what you're hoping for is an improvement in the margins. And the last year, especially in the second half, again, down the stretch, Jalen Hurts in the passing game had no answer for the blitz. It was the teams just went blitz after blitz after blitz after Hurts and just consistently had no way to be able to respond to that. And I think that's what you're hoping for with Kellen Moore is, does he have a plan of attack there? And then also, are you able to try and find some more easy buttons for Jalen Hurts? Back in 2022, there was obviously an RPO heavy offense, but there were a lot of big plays for AJ Brown, Devontae Smith. It was third down pressure. Hey, you know what? I'm going to drop back and I'm going to throw a deep ball down the right sideline to AJ Brown. That's a fun way to live. That's not always an efficient way to live. And so we saw it come back down to earth last year a little bit. So trying to find some more of those easy buttons in the Kellen Moore offense, I think that's something that they'll try and look for. Again, how is the dynamic there between Nick Sirianni? It was his offense for the 3 years previous. What is that going to look like moving forward? Right now, everything looks good, everything sounds good, everything smells good, everything tastes good. But what happens if you have that 2-game losing streak? You lose 3 or 4, something like that. Now things might go back the other way. And so that is something certainly to watch with this team. And then over on the other side, I mean, defensively, I said look, when things got bad on offense, it still finishes a top 10 offense. That defense was dreadful in the second half of last season. And that was after what I thought was a pretty good start. I mean, what they did on the road against the Rams was impressive. They shut out Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay in the second half. They limited Miami to under 20 points, Monday Night Football, under the lights. They did some really good things defensively. Then they made the change from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia midstream, and things just really, the wheels fell off the wagon. And I think when you look at this pass rush, was non-existent in the second half down the stretch. The secondary got old fast, and you saw some holes there that I think they've tried to patch up now. And so you go in, you draft Quinyon Mitchell, you draft Cooper DeJean, you sign Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, you bring him back from the Detroit Lions, and you hope that, all right, is this enough here to keep this thing going and get it back on track? I think they've seen some good things from these young DBs. Cooper DeJean now healthy. What does he look like? He's probably going to play in the slot sooner rather than later. Quinyon Mitchell has played a little bit in the slot as well, John, but it looks like they want to try and keep him on the outside opposite Darius Slay. Keely Ringo has come along nicely. So it's a young secondary, which means it's going to be volatile. There's going to be some ups and downs, but I think that they've got some potential there on the back end. Really, the big question is going to be, who's the playmaker at linebacker? Can that defensive front get back to the level that they were at in 2022 when they went to the Super Bowl, when that defensive line was the best in football? Jalen Carter looks like a future All-Pro. He look as advertised. He is going to be a game wrecker. I'm excited to see what these guys all look like.
All right, then, Ryan, I guess the big picture question for you is, how much of a long-term play are we looking at here for the Commanders, right? They signed a bunch of middle-of-the-road players, right? They feel like they take half of Dan Quinn's defense from Dallas, they bring them over, depth guys, they turn them into starters in Washington. What do you think this looks like, and how slow of a ramp-up is this going to be for this organization, as really from ownership to coach to quarterback, everything is really starting from scratch?
Yeah, I think when you look at what Houston did last year, right, with DeMeco Ryans and CJ Stroud, I think that's something where in Washington right now, inside those walls, are hopeful potentially something like that happens in 2024. Now, I think the trade of Jahan Dotson told you a lot about how this organization thinks about Jaden Daniels, how he can elevate the skill players around him away from guys like Terry McLaurin, because this receivers group at the end of the day is not going to scare anybody beyond 17 on the outside. So at the end of the day, it really revolves around Jaden Daniels. Now, the biggest thing also is going to be this new look Joe Witt defense coming over from Dallas, of course, following Dan Quinn, where on the outside they have questions as well. Emmanuel Forbes working into year 2. This is a cover 3 corner, right, in college at Mississippi State, and they asked him to run man against guys like AJ Brown and DJ Moore early on last year. A lot of questions still with him, and they only have 3 perimeter corners right now on their roster. So that defense is absolutely going to have to limit teams, not saying to limit them to 15 points, but keep teams under 30, keep teams at least under 40. Unfortunately, what that defense wasn't able to do under Jack Del Rio primarily these last few years. But overall, you look at this team, there's talent, there's young talent. I'm excited for Jaden Daniels. I'm excited for guys like Mike Sanders still on the defensive side of the ball. They get a guy in the second round, Johnny Newton, who's going to be a heck of a value piece along this defensive front, where they're going to do some unique things. You see some bear fronts from over the years with Green Bay, 3 interior defensive linemen. You may see that a little bit when Johnny's healthy. So positive vibes here for Washington here as we move into 2024. I'm not expecting the NFC East division title. Nobody should be, but they're on the right track forward, at least adding talent the correct ways and allocating that in all 3 phases of the game.
All right, so let's start our little string of getting inside the team questions here. Bobby, let's start with you. If there's one thing that you think the Cowboys can hang their hat on this year and say, look, we know this is going to be the strength of our roster and we can lean on it and maybe, you know, help make up for deficiencies elsewhere. What do you think the Cowboys can really hang their hat on in 2024?
I mean, the chemistry and the connection that Dak and CeeDee Lamb have is really tough for a lot of teams to contend with. It doesn't matter how much you try and key in on CeeDee Lamb or try and hit him with bracket coverage or anything else. It's something where he is able to take advantage of those things, and he and Dak have such good chemistry. Dak's talked before, at his locker during the week and said there's things about CD and how in sync we are and just the way I see him moving during his route that I have a trust with him and a feel with him that I don't have with anybody else. So I'm willing to take riskier throws with him. I'm willing to trust him. And so the results were there last year, a big season for CeeDee Lamb. Like we mentioned, it got him paid. I think that's a big part of what you can hang your hat on. I would have liked to have said the corner group. They really like Land, obviously, and Diggs. Jordan Lewis has been a steady veteran for them for a number of years. Kalen Carson, a guy they picked in the 5th round this year, was somebody that they were really high on. They were, not for them, when you talk to people around the organization, they refer to him as a blinking light on the draft board in the 5th round. That they looked at him, they're like, that's a 3rd-round player. He shouldn't be here right now. Grab him. And so with DaRon Bland now out with a stress fracture, and you've still got Diggs coming off of an ACL, which they've had a bad history recently of guys first year back from ACLs. Yeah. Terrence Steele was not very good. Michael Gallup was not very good. There's questions at least about Diggs. Bland now out for a couple weeks and having to put Carson in right away. There's just a few more questions about corner than I thought they had initially, but really the thing they'll lean on is just that Dak and CD connection. I expect that's going to be the focal point of everything that they try to do.
You're ready for a change. Payday comes early with Citizens, so go to that retreat. New you moves to the country. Now you're raising goats and launching a lifestyle brand. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Fran, I'm interested as to your answer to that question because it's always been upfront for the Eagles, right? But now Kelsey's not there anymore. Fletcher Cox isn't there anymore. What do you think the Eagles now kind of hang their hat on that consider kind of the identifying trait of the way they want to play football?
I still think it is the line of scrimmage, John, on both sides. I mean, they consistently, and that's the thing, is that they were prepared for this moment. When you draft Jordan Davis, when you draft Jalen Carter, trade up to take both of these guys. And I mentioned it at the end of my last monologue was Jalen Carter looks the part. Every day at practice and training camp, he has a wow moment. And even going back for a piece I did a few months ago for the Philadelphia Eagles. I did a thing where I went back and watched every single snap of Jalen Carter's rookie season. And look, he hit that rookie wall probably like halfway through and the production kind of fell off. But to me, there were still plays every single game where I'm like, man, like this guy he is going to be a force moving forward. To me, he is going to be in that upper echelon of defensive tackles in the league. And so it would not be out of the question for him to be that top dog this year as a second-year player. You've got other guys up front. Josh Sweat, they went out and they signed Bryce Huff. Jordan Davis still there. Obviously, he's his senior. But I think when you look at the talent up front, I think it's going to be led by Jalen Carter defensively. And then when you go over to the offensive side of the football, Lane Johnson is still there. Landon Dickerson is one of the highest paid guards in football for a reason. He's a 2-time Pro Bowler already in 3 years in the league. Jordan Mailata is one of the best run-blocking tackles in football. Cam Jurgens, he had to play guard next to Jason Kelsey last year, but it's tough. First, it was his first year starting, but outside of that, to have two guys that are really undersized playing right next to each other up front, that just wasn't an ideal scenario. He had never played guard before, so getting him back to his more natural position at center, I honestly don't think anything schematically is going to change with the Eagles up front from an offensive line standpoint. I think they're still going to be very multiple with their run game and the way that they try to attack opposing defenses. Obviously, the big change will be just missing Kelsey's leadership and the mental acuity, all the pre-snap phase stuff. That's all something that Jalen Hurts is taking on. So that will be a new challenge for Jalen Hurts here this year, is that he's taking on all of that pre-snap stuff that Jason Kelsey handled before.
Interesting. And Ryan, how about you? I mean, do the Commanders at this point even know what they can hang their hat on as a football team?
Yeah, as much as I want to say the run game, right? Brian Robinson Jr., they bring in Austin Eckler to provide some pop in that room, and Jaden Daniels is going to get a ton of looks in the fringe areas, the line of scrimmage, of course, remaining healthy. You don't want to have that replay of what Washington saw, obviously, back in 2012 with RG3. But it's going to be within the front seven on defense. You bring in Bobby Wagner for a reason. He may be that one-year stopgap guy as your green dot in the middle of this defense. They thought it was Jamin Davis over these last few years in that Ron Rivera regime. That did not work. He's now making the transition down to edge. But Daron Payne, John Allen, they're still there. They drafted Johnny Newton for a reason. John Ridgeway obviously came in from Dallas. He's on this roster, been an excellent piece as a depth addition. So it is going to be along this front seven and limiting teams in the run game and also being different in what they do from an alignment perspective up front. Daron, John, they can play the 0, they can play the 1, they can play the 3. Dorrance Armstrong, Cleveland Farrell, new additions on the outside. They're not going to scare anybody as far as flat out edge rushers, but they're going to get after people. They're going to play some cover one. You're going to see Quan Martin, who played primarily nickel last year, what he did at Illinois. He's going to play some single high safety, provide some versatility from hash to hash. And they're going to ask these corners who, again, they're not a group that scares anybody either, but they're going to play man coverage, use their instincts, and try to make plays in the football. So it's going to be in the front seven for Washington, headlined, of course, as it always has been, by John Allen and Daron Payne.
And I think for the Giants, it's their pass rush for really the first time probably since they were talking about Super Bowls in like the early 2011, 2012 area. You know, they invested a lot of money and draft capital in the trade and Brian Burns. They had drafted Kayvon Thibodeau in the top 10. Dexter Lawrence is one of the best nose tackles in the league. If their defense is going to have success, it's going to have to be because of their pass rush and play up front. And, you know, we'll talk about the holes in a second, but I think they're going to have to count on that front to erase some potential issues in the back end of their defense. Football season is coming, and so is the next college semester. If you need funding, a Citizen student loan can help you pay for 100% of your school certified costs. Get your rate quote in about 2 minutes at citizensbank.com/pay for college. All right, let's go to the opposite end of this spectrum here, Bobby. If there's something that you have the biggest question about heading into week one, when you're like, all right, this could sink our season if with the way the Cowboys structured this doesn't work, what would you say that would be for the Cowboys in 2024?
Yeah, it's two things, I guess, that are kind of concerning right now when you look at the Cowboys. First off, you mentioned half the roster left for Washington with Dan Quinn. I think Dallas if you go guy 1 through 22, you look at their starters on both sides of the ball. Dallas is one of the probably 10 best, top 22 in the NFL. Problem is that when you look at guy 23 through 53 and look at their depth, they might be bottom third in the NFL or worse. Like it might be even lower than that. They got absolutely decimated with their depth this offseason, losing a bunch of different players. Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong, those were their depth edge rushers. They lost Jaron Kearse. That was depth at safety. Leighton Vander Esch retired. They just got a lot of their depth stripped away and didn't really do a lot to replenish it. Something that could be boom or bust for them is going to be the offensive line. They lose Tyron Smith. Already's Tyler Guyton. Is Cooper Beebe at center? The rookie, is he an upgrade over Tyler Biadasz, who left for Washington? So those are kind of the things that you look at there. The other aspect of this that's a little concerning is something playing out similar the way it did in 2019. In 2019, the Cowboys were, shocker, before this season, the last team to have your starting quarterback and your head coach in a contract year in the same year, which is what they had run into in 19 with Jason Garrett and Dak Prescott back then. They're doing it again this year. And 2019, that was a locker room that turned toxic really fast when there were so many guys on one-year deals and coaches and players. And when things start to turn, people have a tendency to go, well, I got to start looking out for me. Where's my next job? I got to start making sure that I get my ducks in a row because this isn't working anymore. Anytime they hit some struggles this season, I think people are going to be on the lookout for, do people start looking out for their next gig or looking out for the future and stop looking out for what's happening right now? And that's something that the Joneses, I think, have had to weigh and have to have some level of concern with, because that's what happened in 2019 and they can't let it happen again this year.
Brandon, how about the Eagles? Where is your siren up to keep an eye on early in the year if you think this season is going to go as well as I'm sure the Eagles hope it will?
Yeah, I think the big thing, John, will just be some of the things we talked about earlier. Because honestly, this roster is a good roster. You can look at linebacker and you have questions, but I mean, Devin White, Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., there's a mix of youth, some unproven quantities, and then some veterans there that you're like, all right, like let's throw them all in a cup, shake it all out, and one of these will hit Yahtzee, right? That's kind of the hope, is that one of these guys can churn out to become like a solid level starter, and then you feel good moving forward. So if that's the biggest question mark on the team moving into the season, you feel pretty good. To me, it's more the volatility defensively. It's okay. Darius Slay, he's a starting corner over 30. What happens if he falls off a cliff and the rookie corners aren't ready to go? Then your secondary may not be great. The guys off the edge from the pass rush standpoint, if Bryce Huff is not ready for the limelight as a full-time pass rusher and he needs to be more of a role player, and Josh Sweat just can't find that form, and you see the second half of last year's version of Josh Sweat, then you have no pass rush because you moved on from Hassan Reddick. So it's really like, okay, if this happens or if that happens, then things could go bad defensively. But just looking at it face value, I mean, this is a good roster. You take the coaching dynamics out of it that we spoke about. I think everything else looks pretty good for this team moving forward.
How about the Commanders, Ryan?
Yeah, it's on defense and it's at corner. Now there's a lot of questions, of course, at tackle. Who's going to be protecting Jaden Daniels' blind side? Is it Brandon Coleman, the rookie from TCU? Is it going to be Cornelius Lucas? But this group at corner it may be worse in the league, and it might not be close. Emmanuel Forbes has so much work to do technically. He is their third perimeter corner. They bring in Michael Davis. Benjamin St-Juste is still on the outside, and even the opportunities that you've seen just in the preseason where you get opportunities man-to-man, Emmanuel Forbes against Jarvis Brownlee against the Jets, didn't work out. Benjamin St-Juste against River Craycraft. You look at Benjamin St-Juste, looks the part, 6'3", over 33s on the arms. He can get inside the frame and force guys to get off the line of scrimmage. But he's always been a guy that's looked like 2 years away from being 2 years away for the Washington Commanders. So they line up in week one against Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and then soon after you see Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. It's going to be tough for this Commanders group, really defensively and really as a whole for this roster to ever reach their ceiling if this perimeter group on the outside doesn't have talent. Because they also brought in UDFA, Chigozie Anuzium, paid him a lot from Colorado State. He's on the roster. Again, as I mentioned earlier, guys, they only have 3 perimeter corners on this roster, and those are the guys you're going to see on the field when teams align in that base 11 personnel. So it's huge this year for Washington's perimeter corners to try and at least be close to league average for them.
You're right. I'm going to follow up. I'm surprised that I know you kind of mentioned off the top you didn't go with the offensive line because you have a rookie quarterback who's, 190 pounds soaking wet, depending on when you put him on a scale. And frankly, as great as he was at LSU, and he was a top 10 player on my board, I think he's going to be a really good player. I don't think he he didn't face a lot of pressure at LSU. And when he did, it was a lot of running, not a lot of throwing under pressure. Do you think that offensive line has the potential of really derailing the first year of Jaden Daniels, despite all that talent that he has?
I think after the last few years of what Washington's seen in the offensive line, I think whatever they do this year has to be some sort of better. Now, I will also say this, John, in that, look, you look at what LSU had up front, Emory Jones, Will Campbell. Those are 2 first-rounders in this year as well, protecting Jaden Daniels. Now, I have confidence in what Washington has at the tackle spot. Now, Andrew Wiley, I have some questions with him on the right side. Followed, of course, Eric Bieniemy from Kansas City last year. That didn't work out there, but he is still there. On the left side, however, Cornelius Lucas has been one of their better tackles that hasn't received snaps really these last few years. He's always been that key 6th offensive lineman. If he starts right now and what it looks like at week 1 on the left side of this line of scrimmage, to where they also brought in Nick Allegretti and we brought in Tyler Biadasz, of course, from Dallas, this group up front, I think, is going to be fundamentally much better, not only in when they have to drop anchor and pass pro, which they're going to sling it around a little bit, but they also fit the body types of what Cliff Kingsbury likes in this vertical downhill type of run game that we know Brian Robinson does well, has done in Washington, and what he did well in Alabama. So there are questions there, of course. I'm not expecting them to be a top 5 group. They're not the Philadelphia line. They're not Detroit. They're not Cleveland. But I think they could be absolutely a league average group this year. And if they are, they will allow Washington and Cliff Kingsbury to expand that playbook with Jaden Daniels.
And look, and I think given the answer I'll give for the Giants here, I'm looking at the Eagles and Cowboys guys here. Considering the Commanders and Giants are both going to give the secondary as the 2 biggest issues on their roster, I think probably bodes well for the A.J. Browns and CeeDee Lambs and Dak Prescott's and Jalen Hurts of the world. But look, the Giants have, of their starting corners, they're all 24 years old or younger. Their starting safeties are 25 and 22. They're just rolling out a bunch of young players here in a new defensive system, young defensive backfield that runs a lot of zone and requires a lot of communication and passing guys off. I'm curious to see how the Giants early will handle some of that stuff. Bobby, swing player for the Cowboys. Who's one guy that they're really depending on maybe taking that next step and becoming, maybe a young guy becoming a good player, a newcomer they sign that they need to step up and be a really good player at their position that you think could really impact their season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at what's going on the defensive interior for them, they really need Oso Odighizuwa, their three technique, to more consistently step up. He's flashed really well early on every year that he's been in the league. It doesn't always, his motor runs so hot. It's almost like he gets fatigued by about week 12. He's just burned out by the end of the season, and the production just really goes downhill. He's one that I think that if they could get consistent play out of him, they'd feel better about what they're able to do with their pass rush, especially after they lost a lot of depth there during this offseason. I think that's a big one for them. Honestly, Terrence Steele coming back from injury is going to be big for them because 2022, he was one of the better run blocking right tackles in the NFL. And he tears his ACL. And last year he came back and he was not the same. He's looked a lot better during training camp. Mike McCarthy said he thinks it's the best training camp that he's had since he's been here. And he and Zach Martin just work so well in conjunction with each other in run block combo stuff that if they are able to get that version of Terrence Steele back or even better, their run game could be on this wide spectrum of much more effective to struggling a ton based just on Steele. Steele, I think you could argue, is the biggest X factor for them in terms of their success this season.
It's funny. Let me follow up real quick because I thought you might reference one of the two first and second round picks last year. I know Schoonmaker's kind of buried a little bit on the depth chart, but Mazi Smith was the first round pick last year. I know they had him drop all this weight. He's trying to gain it back. It hasn't really worked. What have you seen from Mazi Smith as a guy that I'm sure they hope can try to make that run defense just a little bit better?
I've seen Mazi Smith hang his head a lot at practice is what I've seen.
Well, that's not great.
And that's no, it's not. For somebody who watched Taco Charlton and Tristan Hill hang their head a lot during practice as top picks for the Cowboys in years past, it's concerning when you see him out there practicing. Jeff Scania, who was in Washington last year, he gets into him a lot at practice, and he's trying to bring it out of him. And I think the thing for the Cowboys is they just want to see that he can take that criticism and he can level up and not let it defeat him. I think Mazi Smith has a tendency to kind of let that stuff defeat him. Last year, he lost 30 pounds from the start of the season to the end of the year, not on purpose. This was a 330-pound one technique that fell below 300 pounds by the end of the season. And it was it was a disastrous rookie year. And I think it's not great that when you get in here in training camp, 2 weeks into training camp, they said, we need to go get Jordan Phillips. And then they said, we need to go get Linval Joseph. When you make two moves like that, that kind of buries Mazi a little bit. If Mazi Smith were not a first-round pick, I don't know that Mazi Smith would have been kept on the roster this year.
Wow, strong words, Fran. How about you? And I'm gonna maybe tease maybe a defensive tackle that was a high pick for the Eagles as well.
Yeah, I was going back and forth on it, John, honestly, as Bobby was talking about Mazi Smith. I was like, oh, maybe we'll go Jordan Davis because initially I was thinking Quinyon Mitchell, but for me, Jordan Davis is a guy that you want to see take that next step. It's going to be year 3 for him. Howie Roseman said that on draft night, the night they drafted him, and they traded up to take him at 14th overall back in 2022, is, hey, if he does not take that step as a pass rusher, then this is not a good pick. We know what Jordan Davis can be as a run defender, and at times he has been a truly dominant force at the point of attack, but the flashes as a rusher have been exactly that. They have just been flashes. And so being able to see that consistently, especially once you get past the week 4, week 5, week 6 mark, that would be ideal for this football team. When you lose Fletcher Cox on the inside, obviously you're expecting Jalen Carter is going to take that mantle, but you'd love to be able to see Jordan Davis really take that next step as a full-time player for this defense. And that's not to say that, hey, second half, he completely disappeared. He had some outstanding moments in the second half. But again, it's just really more about the level of consistency with him against both the run and the pass, because he's a little bit of a roller coaster right now against both. He's a great kid. He works hard. That's not the question. It's just really about putting it all together from a technique standpoint on the field. If he can do that, and if he can raise his level of play, that will mean a lot for this Eagles defense.
Ryan, is it too simplistic to just say it's your second overall pick quarterback?
I think that's the easy answer. Yeah, but I'm gonna go on defense, and I think it is Frankie Louvu. A guy that comes in that was used primarily as that A/B gap attacker as far as a blitzer up the middle. And I think when you watch Frankie at Carolina, and then what he's asked to do now to really play beside Bobby Wagner in the hip pocket of a future Hall of Famer, I can't wait to see him. And I know a lot out there are excited to see what he does in the front seven here, because he is going to play that hybrid type of role for this Commanders defense, to where he's going to be in the A gap, he's going to play 5 tech, he's going to be wide 9, he's going to play in coverage. what he will be beside Bobby Wagner this year is going to be huge for the overall impact of this front seven that I mentioned prior, because all the attention every year is on Daron Payne and John Allen, but it's a step back. And Washington hasn't had good linebacker play since London Fletcher was in town years ago. And prior to that, it was LeVar Arrington in the 2000s. That's the last time good linebacker play was in Washington. So having Frankie Louvu in the building, who they paid handsomely to come in from Carolina, having Bobby Wagner as that green dot in the middle, where they live in two linebackers in the middle of the field. They're going to bring some hybrid guys down, as Dan Quinn did in Dallas, whether it's your Jeremy Chins, your Derek Forrests. They drafted Dom Hampton out of Washington. He's not a safety. He moved him down to linebacker. He's going to be that hybrid piece as well. But overall, Frankie Louvu in the middle of this defense, what he's going to do at a variety of depths is going to be huge for the Brigantine Gold this year.
And for the Giants, look, Daniel Jones is the easy answer. Can he play better? But I think whether or not he plays better is a lot to do with the two big units around him, right? His targets. And I think Malik Neighbors highlights that list. I mean, guys, I've been here 18 years now. I've been at every training camp practice. He's the best rookie I've ever seen. Now, keep in mind, Odell Beckham Jr. had a hamstring in his rookie year in training camp, so I didn't get to see him in his rookie training camp year. But Malik Neighbors has been dominant. He's been that good. And I think they've gotten a new offensive line coach, Carmen Brasillo, who's from Dante Scarnecchia School, came over from Vegas, who did elevate an offensive line there that did not have Pro Bowl caliber players except for Colton Miller. They brought in veterans from there as well. I think the offensive line will not be the worst in the league like it was last year. I think they're hoping to get in like the 22nd area, which would be a huge, step up for where the Giants were last year, giving up 85 sacks. So I think they're taking enough steps offensively where they can be more watchable than they have been, frankly, the last couple of years. And a lot of that's to do with Malik Neighbors. Can he be that number one guy? Then you can slot Slayton Hyde and Wando Robinson into where they belong on the depth chart, not where they would have to be. And, I'm sure Bobby talks about it with CeeDee Lamb. His presence allows other guys to be the best versions of themselves. And I think that's the situation if Neighbors can be what he looks like he is. And again, I hate to put that in a rookie because it's frankly not fair, but I really do think that's kind of where the Giants are at this point. All right, let's kind of have more of a free-flowing here deal in the final 15 minutes, guys. What do you think success means for your team, and what does kind of this division look like to you? Fran, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, success for this Eagles team is getting into at least the second round of the playoffs and beyond. So you want to start with winning the division and then moving on from there. I think anything short of that, and there's going to be serious discussions about what the future of this team looks like and what changes need to be made. So I think when you look at this team, there's certainly high aspirations right now for this season.
How about you, Bobby?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same standard it's been for 30 years now. They got to get back to a conference title game. And you've heard a lot from people. They'll say, Mike McCarthy's won 12 games 3 years in a row. That's a great accomplishment. Mike McCarthy wasn't brought in here to win 12 games 3 years in a row. Mike McCarthy was brought in here to be different in January from what Jason Garrett did, and it hasn't been different yet. And so I think for them, they've got to see conference title game this year. If you don't get to the conference title game, anything short of that, and there are a lot of this is going to look very different. Entire coaching staff might be different, and several players might be different. But I think for everybody, for their futures here in Dallas, this is a big make or break kind of year where they've got to get further than they've been the last 28, 29 years.
And I realize there's no singular easy answer to this, Bobby, but I mean, you even mentioned the thing you're hanging your hat on is the chemistry between Dak and CeeDee Lamb. Even that didn't look right in the playoff game against the Packers last year, right? Like nothing looked right, oddly. What's going on in these playoff games, man?
That's the thing is that we've heard, and I'm a big Dak Prescott defender. I think Dak Prescott is one of the, top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the NFL. And when the discussion has come up about, well, Dak really dropped the ball over here and did this, and it's like, okay, he could have put up 40. Green Bay was going to put up 55 that day. Like the only reason they scored 48 is because they said, all right, mercy, we'll let you guys have the fourth quarter. I mean, that just felt like an utter collapse from guy 1 through 53, which then makes me say, what's going on from the top down? And in terms of preparation during the week and their game plan and how they were ready to attack, because Green Bay came in there and punched them in the mouth on both sides of the ball, and they weren't prepared for it. So there have been a lot of points during the playoff runs where it's, man, you've got a poor performance here, and that was the difference. That's why you lost by 7 to San Francisco, or, oh, that's why you lost by 3 to Green Bay in 2016 is because this guy didn't perform. last year was a sobering moment for everybody, I think, where they said, how do you walk into a playoff game at home and collectively just nobody is any good? Nobody looks prepared. And that was something that's been tough for everybody to swallow. And I don't know that they've been able to shake that feeling completely yet. So I don't know that they have a great answer as to what happened last year for a complete and total collapse across the board. But I think Mike McCarthy probably recognized that, look, I'm at the top. I'm preparing everybody down below me. And so that ultimately falls on me that, the whole team looked out of sorts.
Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's about laying the foundation, right, in Washington. And that foundation is in the form of Jaden Daniels. And you can also potentially say that your franchise left tackle in Brandon Coleman, or a guy for the future in Mike Sanders still. So it's about allocating talent that they haven't been able to do in such a long time, adding talent via the draft and building from there. I don't think anybody's going to sit here and say that Washington's a favorite in the East and not a favorite to punch their ticket to a wild card round. But I think when you look at this roster, fundamentally, they have a nice mix of youth-infused talent. They have some veterans. As I mentioned, Bobby Wagner's going to be a major addition in that front seven for that defense. They have some talent there, but talent, you don't win games on a spreadsheet, right? You got to line up nose to nose with the man in front of you and execute come game day. But overall, in 2024, with Adam Peters all the way down to Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels, it's about laying the foundation for Washington, hopefully, in what is a franchise that can get back to those glory days that were so long ago for Washington.
You love turf. You're good at it. So you start a turf biz. Business grows, your savings grow. Become the most celebrated name in turf. Are you ready for all that life brings?
Yeah, look, I'm going to reference the Thanksgiving game the Giants are playing in Dallas. I want to be able to walk into that building and walk out of that building thinking something is still at stake for the season, right? Can you still be in the mix and not like this, oh, well, if you win 4 games, they lose 4 games, you have a chance to get the 7th seed in the playoffs. Like, can you legitimately have a real chance to, like, compete for that final wild card spot when you hit December, which frankly has not happened enough for the Giants over the past 5 or 6 years? It did 2 years ago. Can you still be legitimately in the mix? Believe it or not, I know Bobby knows this. Fran and Ryan probably don't. The Giants have never beaten Dak Prescott as a starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. Not once. I mean, he's been in the league a long time. A long time now. That's a problem. So you want to be competitive in December and try to make that same type of run you made in 2022. All right, I'll leave this wide open. You guys can just give me your first thought that comes to your mind about the division or even the conference, as you, especially I think for Dallas and Philly, you guys are really competing to get to that championship game again, to get to the Super Bowl. Fran, why don't we start with you? Just kind of maybe you think what's going to be the turning point of the NFL this year, just something that you think is really important in this division or conference as you think about it in context of the Eagles.
Yeah, and I know all of you guys know this, but one of my favorite stats in all of professional sports, not just the NFL, but all of sports, is the fact that we have not had a repeat NFC East division winner since 2004, 2005. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's silly. So to me, I think that continues this year. I'm not going to bet against that. So my guess is that the Eagles are able to come out on top here this year. I think that it's going to be a two-team race there at the top, obviously, as we've discussed, between the Eagles and the Cowboys. But it just feels like with the vibes in Dallas and a lot of the things that Bobby has hit on here today, that it feels like the Eagles going into the season have a little bit of the edge there, but it's going to be fun to just kind of see things play out. I think this NFC is open because it hasn't been great vibes out in San Francisco either. Obviously, a lot of things pointing out well for Detroit, but I think when you look at the rest of these teams in this conference, there is room here for wins to be had. And so I think I look at the Eagles, I look at Dallas, two teams that are very capable of having double-digit win seasons. I just think that the Eagles more than likely come away with the division.
How about you, Bobby?
Yeah, look, I mean, things clicking into place for Dallas, everything goes right. They could be a 12-win team again if everything falls into place. But I mean, things very rarely do fall into place exactly the way you want. I think what's more likely is that the Cowboys are kind of going through this sobering evaluation for themselves where they look and say, we've been pretty consistently for the last 3 years or so right there with basically the 49ers where we're trying to catch them, but we're right there as like the second team kind of jockeying with Philly. I think they're at this troubling point after the Green Bay loss where they feel like, man, Green Bay's on the ascent, Detroit's on the ascent, Rams played a lot better, and now Dallas is stuck in this position where they go, conceivably, are we the 5th? Are we the 6th best team in the NFC? Not even like, talking about in the NFL. We're talking about in the NFC. Are we 5th or 6th, potentially? And I think that I would not be surprised if this is not well below, but I would not be surprised if this is a slightly below 500 team this year, that they're
And
8-9 or something like that, because it's got such it's such an odd moment right now here in Dallas where you feel like nothing is certain past this year. It's a very difficult schedule, and they didn't do a whole lot to buy in, even though Jerry used the all-in quote all off season. They didn't do a lot to have. They added Eric Kendricks, and then since then, it's a bad sign to me when you have added 12 players between August 1st and August 20th with NFL veteran experience. That means you know that you don't have things right here, and you're swapping pieces and kind of panicking a little bit. So Dallas absolutely thinks could click. They could be a 12-win team again. I think more likely this is about a 500 team, and there's going to be a lot of changes after this season.
so let me, Bobby, I'm going to bring this full circle then to your first answer. Do you think
Mhm.
that's part of the calculation where if Dallas looks at their roster and they say, all right, we're the fifth best team in the NFC, fourth best team in the NFC. Can we get better than that if we pay our quarterback $60 million? Like if they can't realistically see a path there, and again, I'm a big Dak Prescott fan too. I think he's a top 8 quarterback in the league. But if we can't see a path with him at that number, even if you don't, and look, an unknown quarterback horizon is a scary thing. All of our franchises have been through that where we're trying to find a quarterback. It sucks. Nobody wants to go through it. It's really bad. That's how you get guys like Quincy Carter as your quarterback. Just go down the list for all of us. It's not pretty. Is that what the calculation is in deciding how much you're willing to invest in Dak, that maybe they've hit their ceiling with him making that type of level of salary?
I don't even know that it's that. I think it's that they view themselves right now as this was the year they opened a window a couple of years ago financially, where they did different things where they were flipping switches with contracts and
Sure.
restructuring deals and pushing money off. And this year and next year are kind of the 2 years to pay the piper. And so I think they recognize that, all right, they maybe want CD and Dak here long term. These next 2 years might be difficult to put anything around outside of young, cheap talent. Well, it's rough when you want young, cheap talent, and you gave away your 4th-round pick for Trey Lance last year. And so when you have certain things like that, or you wanted Eric Scott in the 6th round a year ago, so what did you do? You traded your 5th-round pick in 2024 so that you could get the 6th in 2023, and then you cut Eric Scott this year. So when you need cheap talent to weather these 2 years, cheap young talent, you need those to hit, and then you don't necessarily have the resources, or those guys aren't hitting like Mozzie Smith and Luke Schoonmaker, and you're not getting these perfect drafts anymore, it kind of sets you back. So I think the Cowboys look at it and they say, we had a bad draft. We're going to have to tighten our belt for the next couple of years. But after that, we're fine building forward with Dak and CD. We need to weather this financial storm where we got to kind of let these charges hit the cap finally.
And then Ryan, given where the Commanders are, maybe this isn't, talking about who's going to win the Super Bowl, win the division, but something else that you kind of are fascinated about in terms of the division or the conference this year.
Yeah, John, I think I can speak for both of us here in that the Giants and the Commanders really don't have much to lose here in 2024. So just working back on tracks and competing here in 2024 and showing production in all 3 phases of the game. But I'm glad Bobby brought it up because I have a lot of questions with the Dallas roster and Philadelphia roster, specifically what happened back end of last year. Was Jalen Hurts going to regress? They brought in Saquon Barkley for a reason. A lot of skilled players in that offense, but Saquon's going to take touches away. Defensively, we talk about linebacker. I mean, when I think of Dallas, have not been able to figure out the linebacker position. I mean, you drafted Micah Parsons as an off-ball linebacker, and away from individual players, right? Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Marcus Lawrence. That sounds great on paper, but you're talking about Caitlin Carson as a starter opposite right now of Trevon Diggs. Offensive line, you're starting 2 rookies. You don't have a running back that scares anybody as far as to expand that playbook offensively. Beyond CeeDee Lamb, he's 1 injury away from Jalen Tolbert, Ryan Flournoy, and Brandon Cooks. So there's a lot of questions for me really with specifically Dallas. And I'm glad, again, Bobby brought it up as far as potentially being an 8-win team this year. I see more of an 8-win team right now, or 9-win team than a 12 or 13-win team. So right now I do think Philadelphia for me is the team to beat in the division. I think Washington and the Giants are going to be a team that, for our sake, John, as far as potentially competing for a wild card spot here in the NFC, overall, as a conference perspective, Detroit's my number 1 team in the conference right now. I love what they're doing up there in Detroit and the additions they added, and Ennis Rakestraw and Terrion Arnold on defense, even though losing C.J. Gardner-Johnson back to Philly. But overall, I just think Washington and Giants have nothing to lose. Philly and Dallas are in huge years to where that Super Bowl window, specifically for Philadelphia, they don't get this year. That window continues to shrink.
All right, guys, final question, and you can take this any way you want. I'm fascinated by team building. to be honest with you. And that'll be my answer. And we're seeing the 49ers struggle this right now. How much can we afford to pay Brandon Ayuk? Can we give Trent Williams a raise, which I think is a much bigger deal than the Ayuk thing, to be totally honest with you. We're seeing Dallas struggle with this with Dak Prescott. We see the Eagles handle this by just, putting endless void years on the end of all their contracts to push the money down the road, right? The Giants do flat contracts. Obviously, the Commanders are starting from scratch. They're carrying a lot of salary cap space over. So, Fran, I'll start with you because I think the Eagles probably do this in a more unique way than a lot of other teams in terms of how they're building their team and trying to keep all their players, avoid the cap issues. They're actually, $25 million under the cap, something like that. They're going to carry that into next year. So how do you see team building moving forward for just not only the Eagles, but in terms of the NFL and how the Eagles have done it in terms of trying to put a long-term winner together, which in the salary cap world can be very, very difficult?
Yeah, I mean, without getting too deep into the nitty gritty, and honestly, guys, like I'm not the most well versed in the nitty gritty when it comes to the salary cap stuff. But when it comes down to it, Jeffrey Lurie, the way that he operates, I mean, he is willing to put cash down for this team, whether that means getting out of contracts or whether that means footing the bill for contracts for down the road. He is willing to put cash down to help this football team and try and get a win, another Super Bowl win. So really, that's what it ultimately comes down to, is that he is willing to make some of those sacrifices that not all owners are. But I think at the end of the day, that is one way that they go about trying to make sure, we are always putting our best foot forward with building this team. And then outside of that, it's trying to stay true to their core philosophies of building through the line of scrimmage, always operating the pass game. We want to have an elite offense. So trying to stay true to those core values while also, again, using cash to be able to foot the bill whenever possible.
And then, Bobby, I think the Cowboys are interesting because you guys build so well through the draft, right? Will McClay is just a really good evaluator. I know, based on what I see on Twitter, Cowboy fans don't seem to think that Jerry Jones likes to spend enough, but I looked at some of the stuff on the books, and they have dead money next year for Martin and Prescott, like upwards of $40 to $60 million. I'm like, how much more dead money do you guys want to pack into a year? I don't get the complaints, to be honest with you, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'm looking from the outside in here. So how do you see the Cowboys trying to evolve here as teams try to figure out how to team build as all these top salaries for top players kind of go off the charts?
Yeah, a good example of the dead money for the Cowboys. Ezekiel Elliott's cap number this year is $2 million. But that's his current cap number. He also has $6 million in dead money from being released last year that they split the cap charge. That's also sitting there. So Ezekiel Elliott is being charged twice to your salary cap this year, totaling $8 million. But that's the kind of thing they did where they tried to open a window where they went financially all in, and now they've had their issues. The Cowboys do draft really well. Will McClay's done a great job, not only with his evaluations, but he did something kind of unique, I think, where they built up an entire scouting staff kind of from scratch under Will's guidance and taught them Will's ways and the way that he looks at things. And their scouting staff has a lot of really great rising stars now. Mitch LaPointe, Chris Vaughn, Ross Winchie, Klein Kubiak. Like, they've got all these guys who are really good talent evaluators, and it's almost kind of been a double-edged sword in that they're so good at drafting that it feels like ownership kind of goes, oh, they'll bail us out. They'll get all the players. They'll nail these guys. And so we don't need to go add this over here, this over here. We'll just let the draft hit for us. Well, the draft is not an exact science, and you're going to have every now and then a draft that just doesn't hit. Dallas has had a better hit rate than a lot of folks, but you are going to have, last year's draft every now and then. Mozzie Smith, Luke Schoonmaker, your fourth-round pick, Junior Fehoko, who you just waived. Like, you're going to have these issues every now and then where drafts crop up like that. And when that happens, it becomes just critical to your team's health because you didn't do anything to supplement it at all. So I think building through the draft the way the Cowboys do, and Will McClay's the way that he's built up his scouting staff, a really strong personnel department, I do think that's a great way to approach it. But you've got to have some willingness to spend a little bit more money. My favorite stat back in the day that I used to throw out to Cowboys fans who talked about free agent spending was that every Super Bowl winner, I believe from 2013 to 2021, had spent more guaranteed money on one outside free agent than the Cowboys had spent in that same offseason on their entire outside free agent class.
Wow.
And so whether it was Darrelle Revis or, different guys like that, Darrelle Revis on the Patriots or another year somebody else, Cowboys, the most guarantees I think they ever gave out to somebody was Cedric Thornton during that year run, which was like 8 million guaranteed. And so they just don't come close in that respect. But I think the Will McClay method and going with the personnel department that way, that is the way to build. But you've also got to supplement that to some extent. You can't just put it all on your personnel department. That's too much pressure to put on them.
Yeah, and on young players in their first and second year, which can get very tough. Ryan, you have an owner with deep pockets down there with the Commanders now. Obviously, you don't want to flex that too early until you're ready to do so. How do you see them kind of approaching this team building process?
Yeah, I think we can all remember the Dan Snyder, Vinny Serrato days of old, right? Albert Hainsworth, OJ Otagwe, the interest of Nnamdi Asomugha before he goes to Phil. I mean, it was a long time ago where they were just paying 100 million guaranteed to a lot of different players. That's not the approach from Adam Peters. He's going to build through the draft, and I think you saw that this year, and even just recently trading John Dotson. Now that no one's going to be moved by 2 7th-rounders, but that 3rd rounder may come back. Maybe they package that for another deal. Who knows, right? Jonathan Allen's coming up on a potential another extension. Is Johnny Newton going to be that player that replaces him along the interior, and they want to move him for capital? We'll see. But Adam Peters, as he did in San Fran, hip to hip with John Lynch, they're going to continue to build through the draft. And right now, a little is a blank slate, if you will, from Adam Peters. It really is his first off season. Brought in free agents on a few prove-it deals, right? You think of Austin Eckler, Cleveland Farrell, Dante Fowler Jr. Prove it, right? A little bit along this front seven. So I'm excited personally. A lot of people should be excited about what the Commanders are going to do, both in Washington and elsewhere, as far as the next really 4, 5, 6 years. But overall, he's going to continue to build through the draft, and as he did in San Francisco, to really what they've become here in the NFL.
Gentlemen, this has been fun. Tell the folks where they can find your work. Ryan, let's start with you.
Absolutely. Bleacher Report, Draft Network, and I'm on Twitter. If you don't follow me there already, at _Ryan Fowler. My podcast is Commanding the Huddle.
Fran, you got a new home. Tell people where it is.
Yep, you can follow me on Twitter at FDuffyNFL. You can check out my Eagles coverage with PHLY Eagles, and then draft coverage across the entire All City network.
Bobby?
Yeah, Monday through Friday, 105 through the Fan, 6 to 10 a.m., covering the Cowboys there on the website too. My podcast, Love the Star, with Brian Broaddus, friend of the show here. And then draft coverage starting around January all the way through April for DallasCowboys.com.
All right, guys, we're about to kick off another season. It should be a lot of fun. We thank you for joining us on our NFC East Roundtable, presented by the Giants Huddle podcast, brought to you by Citizens, the official bank of the Giants. For our team, I am John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time, everybody.